Here's a list of what you should do before and during your lab period. You want to make sure to read the lab packet. You want to watch the lab videos that are posted online. You want to write everything down in your lab notebook like the following: all the chemical equations, all the formulas, and the names of the new compounds.
Also make sure to write down the structures of the compounds, as well as the colors of the compounds, and any color changes that you might observe. Lastly, make sure that you list all the molar masses of the compounds for any quick references if they're involved in your calculations. So again, make sure to use these quick tips before coming into the lab and during the lab.
We will be going over some lab techniques that will help you get better results. These techniques involve differentiating between percent error and percent yield, how to use a balance properly, and how to use clamps and stands.
We'll also go over how to use a burette correctly, vacuum filtration techniques, and how to dry and wash compounds, and also how to use gravity filtration. Lastly, we'll go over the sig figs rules because these are always used throughout all of your labs.
This technique involves the differentiation between percent error and percent yield. Percent error is the experimental value subtracted by the theoretical value and then divided by the theoretical value. Take the magnitude of this, or the absolute value, and then multiply by 100. When you get the percent error, you want to make sure to write sources of error. For example, when you lose material during filtration.
Now, percent yield is the actual yield, which is the mass of your product that you weigh on the balance, divided by the theoretical yield, which is what you determine using calculations, times 100. Now, there might be an instance where your percent yield is over 100%, and this might occur if your product is too wet and contains water as a contaminant. And if your percent yield is too low, maybe like 5 or 10%, you may have lost some material during the experiment, again, maybe through filtration, or some material may have been stuck to the beaker. And lastly, approximately 75% is a pretty good percent yield.
Here are a few tips on how to use a balance properly. First off, you want to make sure that you use weighing paper that are found in these boxes instead of a beaker, so that when you're transferring any material, you don't lose any of it. If the balance is not clean, make sure to have it off and then clean it. Then turn it on, and then place your weighing paper for your solids and tare. Make sure to use the shiny side instead of the rough side when you're weighing out your solids. Next, you want to weigh out your compound and make sure to record to 4 decimal places without rounding, and put this in your lab notebook. When weighing out liquid compounds, you want to make sure to use a test tube and then place it inside a beaker. Now for the liquids, place the test tube inside the beaker, put it on your balance, and then tare. Then you want to weigh out your liquid sample into the test tube, and then record your mass to 4 decimal places and put this in your lab notebook. There are many different types of clamps that you will be using throughout your labs, and this is the stand that you'll be attaching them to. This clamp is usually used for Bunsen burners or separatory funnels. You just want to attach this to your stand, and it can be adjusted by lifting it up or down. This type of clamp can be used for titration. In titration, you would take a burette and you would place it on the clamp like this. This clamp is used to hold all your objects, such as flasks for like vacuum filtration, or even your thermometers. You'll be using this clamp to attach this one to the ring stand. Here's a typical setup for titration, and I'll just be going over some tips on how to use a burette. To fill your burette, you want to make sure that it is closed and that there's a funnel at the top. Also, do this in a sink and not at the stand. Then you just want to pour your solution through. To get rid of any air bubbles, you just want to open the burette and let the solution through. Always make sure to have a white background when you're recording your initial and final readings. You do not have to start at the 0 mark. Just make sure to record the initial reading to 2 decimal places. Whenever you're reading a burette, you want to make sure that the solution is at eye level. You also want to make sure to have a white background under your flask so that you can see any immediate color changes.
Now I'm going to go over how to do vacuum filtration. So here's the main setup. You have your clamps and it's attached to the flask to hold it in place. And you also have your funnel up here with the filter paper inside, and you want to make sure the filter paper is a little wet before you turn the vacuum on so that it sticks. You then have your rubber hose, which is attached to the vacuum. Now all you're going to do is turn on the vacuum and slowly pour your solution through. Now, if you have any solid remaining in your beaker, make sure to use a rubber policeman to get it out. Now, once you're done filtering your solution, first you want to remove the hose slowly and then turn the vacuum off. Now I'm going to go over a washing technique. To do this, make sure that your vacuum is off and then take your washing solution. This might be either distilled water or maybe an acetone or alcohol wash. Take whatever solution you're using and cover the crystals completely until they're fully submerged. Once this is done, then turn your vacuum on to filter the solution. Now, for drying techniques, there are a couple different ways you can do this. Once you wash your crystals, you can leave the vacuum on for a few minutes to suck the air out and dry the crystals before weighing them. And I'll go over a second technique as well. Now, a second technique to dry your crystals is to place them into a paper towel and just wrap the paper towel around the crystals and leave them overnight to dry. Now I'm going to go over a couple tips on the technique of how to do gravity filtration. So for gravity filtration, you're just going to take your normal funnel and place it inside a flask. You'll then take a larger piece of paper, of filter paper, and fold it in half, and fold it in half once again to form a cone shape. Then you'll open up the cone shape and place it inside the funnel. You'll then place the funnel inside your flask, and to get the filter paper to stick to the funnel, you can use a little bit of water. Once you do that, you're ready to filter your solution.
Significant figures are very important. They're used during the lab and also in your calculations. When using a balance, you want to make sure to write down all the significant figures and do not round. And when you're using a graduated cylinder, you want to make sure to use the sig figs to 2 decimal places.
Now it's also important that when you're using a burette, you round to 2 decimal places and write these 2 decimal places in your lab notebooks. And when you're doing all these calculations, you're writing all these numbers down in your report forms, but these numbers have to have the same number of significant figures throughout. So make sure that you're consistent and that your report form matches in all your significant figures. A lot of these labs involve finding an unknown percentage or a constant, and if all of your data is correct, however your sig figs are off or your rounding is incorrect due to your sig figs, you can get an inaccurate result.
As you can see, sig figs are very important inside and outside of lab. So if you forget the rules, invest some time to look at some videos online or ask your professor for help.
So now I'm just going to give you some random tips. For one, when you're measuring out a small volume of something, for example 6 or 7 milliliters, you have these small 10 milliliter graduated cylinders. So instead of using the bigger ones, to get a more accurate reading, make sure you're using the smaller graduated cylinders. Now also, when you're measuring the temperature of a solution, especially when you have a beaker on a Bunsen burner, do not place your thermometer all the way to the bottom, touching the bottom of the beaker, because that's where all the hot air is coming, so the temperature is clearly going to be a lot higher, and you'll get an inaccurate reading. When you use a thermometer clamp, place it maybe in the middle of the solution to get a more accurate reading. And lastly, when you have for example, 60 milliliters of a solution, don't transfer it into a 300 or 250 milliliter beaker. Use a smaller beaker of 150 milliliters, because that is probably the smarter choice. Again, the same thing goes for the graduated cylinders.